Picture this. You're standing on a train platform, surrounded by colleagues in expensive suits who just spent more on their Uber ride than you make in a day. They're laughing, pointing at your monthly transit pass, calling you budget boy, and asking if you got lost on your way to the homeless shelter. But sometimes, the person they're mocking has a story they never saw coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if the story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 months ago, I was just another face in the crowd at Brennan & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm in downtown Chicago. I'd been working there for 2 years as a junior analyst, pulling in barely enough to cover my studio apartment rent and student loans. While my colleagues drove BMWs and Audis to work, I took the Blue Line every single day. The morning everything changed, like any other Tuesday in September. I was standing on the platform at 7:15 a.m. sharp, same as always, when I heard the familiar sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against concrete. Derek Hoffman and his usual crew were approaching. Derek with his perfectly styled hair and $1,000 watch, flanked by Jessica Martinez and Ryan Walsh, both driving cars worth more than my annual salary. "Well, well, well," Derek announced, loud enough for half the platform to hear. "Look who's taken the Peasant Express again." Jessica giggled, adjusting her designer handbag. "Marcus, honey, don't you think it's time to upgrade? I mean, public transportation is so public." Ryan chimed in, pulling out his phone to order yet another rideshare. "My Uber's 3 minutes out. You sure you don't want to split it? Oh, wait, I forgot. You probably can't afford your share." I kept my headphones in, pretending not to hear them, but their laughter carried across the platform. This wasn't new. For 2 years, I'd endured their comments about my vintage clothes from discount stores, my packed lunches instead of expensive downtown restaurants, and especially my daily train commute. What they didn't know, what nobody at the office knew, was why I took that train every single day, rain or shine. The Blue Line pulled into the station with its familiar screech of brakes. As I found my usual seat near the middle of the car, I caught my reflection in the window. 26 years old, wearing a suit I'd bought at an outlet mall 3 years ago, carrying a briefcase that had seen better days. To everyone else, I looked exactly like what Derek called me, a struggling nobody who couldn't afford better. But appearances can be deceiving. The train lurched forward, and I settled in for the 40-minute ride to downtown. This was my thinking time, my planning time. While Derek and his crew sat in traffic, burning through gas money and Uber fees, I was working on something they couldn't even imagine. See, I hadn't always been Marcus Thompson, junior analyst. Before college, before the corporate world, before I learned to blend in with cheap suits and quiet humility, I had a different life entirely. A life I'd left behind for reasons that seemed important at the time, but were becoming less clear with each passing day of mockery and dismissal. My phone buzzed with a text from my older brother Jake, who lived out in Naperville. "Mom's asking about Thanksgiving plans again. You know she wants you to come in uniform, right? She's still got that photo on the mantle." I stared at the message for a long moment, watching the Chicago suburbs blur past the train window. The photo Jake mentioned was from 5 years ago, me in dress blues, standing at attention, 21 years old, and convinced I was going to change the world. That version of Marcus Thompson felt like a different person entirely. Another text from Jake. "Also, Captain Rodriguez called the house looking for you yesterday. Mom gave him your work number. Just a heads up." My stomach tightened. Captain Rodriguez had been my commanding officer, a man I respected more than anyone I'd ever met. If he was calling, it wasn't for small talk. The train pulled into the Fullerton station and more commuters packed in around me. A woman with a stroller struggled to find space, and I automatically stood to help her. Old habits from a time when service and courtesy weren't just words, but a way of life. "Thank you," she said, settling into my seat with her toddler. "No problem," I replied, grabbing a handrail as the train continued south. That's when I noticed him. 3 seats down, reading a newspaper with practiced efficiency, sat Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson. I recognized him immediately, even in civilian clothes. Broad shoulders, silver hair, the kind of posture that screamed military, even in a business suit. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, but there was no mistaking that commanding presence. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of recognition cross his face. He folded his newspaper, studying me with the same intensity I remembered from briefings in Kandahar. My pulse quickened. Of all the trains, on all the lines, in all of Chicago.
Patterson stood as the train approached the loop, moving through the crowded car with practiced ease. As he passed my position, he paused just long enough to murmur, "Thompson. Downtown Millennium Station, track 12, tomorrow, at 0800. We need to talk." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of commuters as the doors opened at Washington. I spent the rest of the ride trying to process what had just happened. Patterson had been more than just another officer. He'd been part of something bigger, something I'd walked away from when I decided to pursue a normal life, something I'd convinced myself was in the past. The train pulled into my stop, and I filed out with everyone else, but my mind was elsewhere. As I walked the 6 blocks to Brennan and Associates, passing food trucks and street vendors, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed civilian life was about to come crashing down. At the office, Derek was already holding court by the coffee machine, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories about his weekend golf game. He spotted me immediately. "There's our train boy," he announced. "Marcus, you missed quite a ride this morning. My Uber driver was telling me about this new express service. Probably still out of your price range, but hey, a guy can dream, right?" Jessica and Ryan left on cue, but I barely heard them. My mind was stuck on track 12, tomorrow to 0800, and the question of what Lieutenant Colonel Patterson could possibly want after all these years. As I settled into my cubicle and fired up my computer, one thought kept circling back. Some secrets have a way of finding you, no matter how far you run or how well you hide. And tomorrow morning, on track 12, my past was about to collide with my present in ways that Derek and his crew could never imagine. That entire Tuesday crawled like molasses. I stared at spreadsheets, attended pointless meetings about quarterly projections, and nodded along while Derek pitched his latest revolutionary client strategy that was basically recycled ideas from last year. But my mind kept drifting to Lieutenant Colonel Patterson and that newspaper he'd been reading so intently. Around 3 p.m., my desk tone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. It was from Quantico. "Marcus Thompson speaking." "Thompson, this is Captain Rodriguez." My blood cold. Rodriguez's voice carried the same authority it always had, even through the phone line. "Captain, Cut the formalities, son. We both know why I'm calling. Patterson briefed me on this morning's encounter. Are you prepared for tomorrow's meeting?" I glanced around the office, making sure no one was listening. Derek was 3 cubicles away, loudly explaining why his fantasy football picks were guaranteed winners this week. "Sir, with respect, I left that world behind. I'm just a civilian now." "There's no such thing as just a civilian when you have your skill set, Thompson. And right now, we need those skills." "Captain, I can't." 0800 an hours, track 12. "Don't make me send someone to collect you." The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my hands trembling slightly. 5 years. 5 years I'd spent building this normal, unremarkable life, and now it was unraveling with a single phone call. "Hey, Marcus," Jessica's voice cut through my thoughts. "Some of us are grabbing drinks at Murphy's after work. Want to join?" "Oh, wait, I forgot. You probably need to catch your little train home." More laughter from the usual suspects. I managed a weak smile and declined, claiming I had plans, which was true in a way. I needed to go home and figure out what the hell I was going to do. The evening commute was torture. Every stop felt like it took forever, and I kept checking my phone, half expecting another call from Quantico. When I finally reached my studio apartment in Logan Square, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat on my fire escape, looking out over the city. My laptop was still sitting on the kitchen table from the night before, displaying a half-finished report about market analytics. Such a far cry from the tactical briefings and mission parameters that used to fill my nights. I opened a new browser tab and, after a moment's hesitation, typed in a familiar URL. The Department of Defense database portal loaded, asking for credentials I hadn't used in years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was a line I sworn I would never cross again. But Patterson and Rodriguez wouldn't have reached out unless something serious was happening. I entered my old access codes, half expecting them to be deactivated. They weren't. And I'm a potential threat now?
You're a former intelligence operative who walked away from active duty and disappeared into civilian life. From our perspective, that makes you either a valuable asset or a significant risk. Recent events suggest we need to determine which. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, technical schematics, and intelligence reports that painted a picture far more complex than what I'd glimpsed in the database earlier. Someone with advanced military training has been conducting systematic reconnaissance on critical infrastructure across 7 states, Patterson continued. The attacks I'm sure you've already identified are just the tip of the iceberg. We believe they're building towards something much larger. I studied the photographs. Surveillance images taken at various locations, showing a figure in civilian clothes who moved with unmistakable military precision. The face was always obscured, but the posture, the way he carried himself, was familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. You think it's someone from our old unit. I don't think it, Thompson. I know it. The question is whether you're going to help us stop him, or whether we need to consider you part of the problem. The silence stretched between us for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of trains arriving and departing, carrying passengers to destinations they never questioned. Simple lives, uncomplicated by the weight of classified knowledge and moral compromises. What exactly are you asking me to do? Patterson leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. We need someone who understands how he thinks, how he operates. Someone who can get close enough to identify him before he completes whatever he's planning. And you think that's me? I think you're the only person left alive who might be able to stop him. The weight of those words settled over me like a lead blanket. I thought about Derek and his smug comments, about Jessica's designer handbags and Ryan's expensive ride shares. I thought about my quiet life in Logan Square, my meaningless job analyzing market trends, the simple anonymity I'd worked so hard to achieve. If I do this, I said finally, there's no going back to my old life. Son, your old life ended the moment I spotted you on that train. The only question now is whether you help us write the ending to this story, or whether someone else writes it for you. I stared at the photographs again, at the shadowy figure who moved like a ghost through America's most vulnerable points. Somewhere out there was a man I'd once served alongside, someone who'd taken the same oath I had, who'd sworn to protect the country that was now his target. I'll need operational authority, full access to intelligence databases, tactical support, and clearance to operate without local law enforcement interference. Patterson nodded. Already arranged. Your civilian cover remains intact for now. Keep going to work, maintain your routine. But tomorrow night, we start hunting. As I rode the Blue Line home through the dark Chicago tunnels, I realized that tomorrow morning's commute would be the last time Derek Hoffman and his crew would be laughing at the guy who couldn't afford better than public transportation. They had no idea they were mocking someone who was about to step back into a world where the stakes were measured in lives rather than quarterly bonuses. Wednesday morning hit me like a freight train. I barely slept, spending most of the night going through encrypted files Patterson had sent to my secure phone, a device that had materialized in my mailbox sometime after midnight, along with credentials that gave me access to intelligence networks I'd hoped never to see again. The target had a name now: Staff Sergeant Dylan Cross, former explosive specialist, same unit as me in Afghanistan, officially listed as KIA 3 years ago after an IED incident near Kabul. Except the body they shipped home apparently wasn't his. I dressed for work like any other day, but strapped to my ankle was a Sig Sauer P320 that felt heavier than it should have. The weight of carrying a weapon in civilian life wasn't just physical. It was the knowledge that Marcus Thompson, mild-mannered analyst, was officially dead. In his place stood someone I'd buried 5 years ago. The Blue Line platform was bustling with the usual morning chaos. Commuters checking phones, tourists consulting maps, and there, right on schedule, Derek Hoffman and his entourage, dressed in their expensive armor and ready to start the day with their favorite sport, making me feel small. "Marcus!" Derek's voice boomed across the platform. "Still slumming it with the masses, I see. Hey, did you hear about that promotion they posted yesterday? Senior analyst position, 40% pay bump. You should totally apply. Oh, wait, they want someone with actual ambition. Jessica snickered, sipping her overpriced coffee. Maybe they have openings in the mailroom. That's more his speed. Ryan was busy scrolling through his phone. My Tesla's getting delivered next week. 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds. You know what your train does 0 to 60 in, Marcus? Never, because it stops every 5 minutes to pick up more losers. I nodded and smiled, playing my part perfectly. But inside, I was cataloging everything. Derek's Rolex? Real, probably worth 15 grand. Jessica's handbag? Hermes. Authentic? Maybe 8,000. Ryan's shoes? Italian leather, custom fitted. These people spent more on accessories than most families made in months, yet they felt threatened enough by my quiet presence to tear me down daily. What they didn't know was that while they'd been climbing corporate ladders, I'd been learning skills that made their petty office politics look like kindergarten games. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Cross spotted at Millennium Station, track 18. Surveillance only. Do not engage without backup. Track 18. 2 platforms over from where I normally caught my downtown connection. I'd be able to observe without changing my routine. The blue line arrived, and I followed my usual pattern, finding a seat where I could watch the city roll past while planning my next moves. But today, everything felt different. The businessman reading his newspaper might be an undercover federal agent. The woman with the stroller could be carrying more than baby supplies. 5 years of paranoid thinking came flooding back like muscle memory. At Union Station, I disembarked and walked through the main concourse, scanning faces with trained precision. Most commuters moved with purpose, but no awareness. Perfect cover for someone who needed to blend in. I made my way toward track 18, checking my 6 and memorizing exit routes. And there he was. Dylan Cross stood at the far end of the platform, dressed in a maintenance worker's uniform, clipboard in hand, looking like he belonged there. But I knew that posture, that way of holding his head when he was concentrating. Even after 3 years of supposed death, some things never changed. He was sketching something, probably structural details, noting security camera positions, timing guard rotations, classic reconnaissance work. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check emails while snapping photos with a camera app that looked standard but transmitted directly to Patterson's team. Cross finished his notes and headed toward the main concourse. I followed him at a distance, using crowds for cover, staying 3 people back and slightly to his left, standard urban surveillance technique. He moved through Union Station like he owned it, confident but not cocky, professional in a way that most people wouldn't notice, but that screamed military training to anyone who knew what to look for. My phone buzzed. Excellent work, maintain distance, team is moving into position. But something felt wrong. Cross wasn't just conducting surveillance. He'd been feeding us information. Those incidents across the Midwest, he wanted us to find them. This whole thing was a setup. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Cross had let himself be identified because he wanted to draw out whoever the government would send to stop him. He'd been waiting for someone with the right background, the right training, someone who understood how he thought. He'd been waiting for me. Sir, I need immediate extraction. He knows I'm here. Negative, Thompson. We need you to maintain contact. This might be our only chance to understand what he's really planning. Cross stood up from his bench and started walking directly toward me. No more pretense, no more games, just a man with military training and unknown intentions, closing the distance between us with purpose. I had maybe 30 seconds to decide whether to run, fight, or trust that 5 years of civilian life hadn't completely dulled my edge. The weight of the pistol on my ankle felt reassuring, but drawing a weapon in Union Station would create chaos that could hurt innocent people. 20 seconds. Cross was moving through the crowd like water, smooth and inevitable. 15 seconds. I could see his hands now, empty but positioned where he could reach concealed weapons quickly. 10 seconds. Time to commit to a course of action. 5 seconds.
Cross was close enough that I could see the scar on his left temple from the IED blast that was supposed to have killed him. "Hello, Marcus," he said quietly, stopping just within conversational distance. "We need to talk." "Funny," I replied, keeping my voice level. "That's exactly what Captain Rodriguez said yesterday." Cross chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Rodriguez always was predictable. Set up a meeting, follow standard protocols, trust that the system would protect him. "Did he tell you about the real reason they pulled you back in?" "Enlighten me." "There's a mole in Homeland Security. Someone feeding information to foreign interests, compromising operations, getting good people killed. Rodriguez thinks it's someone in Patterson's inner circle." The words hit me like ice water. "And you think it's Patterson himself." "I don't think anything, Marcus, I know. Because 3 years ago, when that IED blast was supposed to kill me, Patterson was the only person who knew our route that day." Around us, commuters continued their morning routines, completely unaware that two former soldiers were having a conversation that could reshape everything I thought I knew about why I'd been brought back into this world. Cross stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The question is, are you here to stop me, or are you here to help me expose the truth?" Every instinct screamed that this was manipulation, psychological warfare, an attempt to turn me against my own handlers. But there was something in Cross's eyes, not the madness I'd expected from a rogue operative, but the desperate clarity of someone who'd been carrying an impossible burden alone. "You have 60 seconds to convince me you're not completely insane," I said. Cross smiled again, but this time it was the expression of a man who'd been hoping for exactly this opportunity. "Marcus, what do you know about Operation Blackwater?"
I didn't, but he told me anyway. Car accident on the Beltway. Brake failure. Very tragic, very convenient. Cross's voice hardened. That's when I realized this goes deeper than one corrupt officer. This is institutional rot, Marcus. The kind that can only be cut out with a scalpel, not bureaucratic paperwork. My phone buzzed again. "Thompson, respond immediately or we're coming in." "I have to give them something," I said, showing Cross the message. "Tell them I got spooked and ran. Buy us some time while I show you proof." I typed back, "Target fled north toward Ogilvy Station. Lost visual and crowd. Maintaining search pattern." Cross nodded approvingly. "Good. Now follow me, but make it look casual. We're just two guys heading to catch different trains." We walked through Union Station's main concourse, past shops and restaurants, toward an exit I'd never used before. Cross moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd mapped every inch of this place, which probably meant he had. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Patterson's surveillance network can't reach. Somewhere we can talk without federal agents listening to every word." He led me down a service stairwell marked authorized personnel only. Apparently everyone in this business had skeleton keys to restricted areas. We descended 2 levels below the main station into maintenance tunnels that smelled of diesel fuel and decades of accumulated grime. "Welcome to Chicago's forgotten infrastructure," Cross said, producing a small LED flashlight. Steam tunnels, electrical conduits, and communication lines that were installed in the 1920s and mostly forgotten since. Perfect place for a conversation. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by Cross's flashlight and the occasional work light that still functioned. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and I could hear the rumble of trains passing overhead. "You know what the beautiful thing about old tunnels is?" Cross continued as we walked. "No cell phone reception, no GPS tracking, no digital surveillance, just 2 people and the truth." We stopped at a junction where 4 tunnels met. Cross had set up what looked like a temporary command post, battery-powered computers, communication equipment, and maps covered in red pins marking locations across the Midwest. "This is where I've been working for the past 6 months," he said, powering up a laptop, "trying to stay ahead of Patterson while gathering evidence that might actually convince someone in authority to listen." The computer screen displayed a complex network diagram showing connections between various government officials, defense contractors, and foreign intelligence services. At the center of it all was a photograph of Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson. "Start here," Cross said, pointing to a financial record. "Patterson's been living well above his military salary for the past 3 years. House in Georgetown worth $2 million. Kids in private schools that cost $40,000 a year each. Wife driving a car that costs more than most people's homes." I studied the documents.
Bank records, property deeds, school tuition payments, all of it painted a picture of someone with access to money that didn't come from government paychecks. Could be family money, investments, legitimate side businesses, I said, playing devil's advocate even though the evidence was damning. Could be, except for this. Cross pulled up another file. Patterson's been making regular trips to Vancouver under false identities, meeting with people who work for companies that officially don't exist but are funded through shell corporations tied to Chinese military intelligence. The photographs were grainy but clear enough. Patterson in civilian clothes, sitting across from Asian men in expensive suits, exchanging briefcases in restaurants and hotel lobbies. And here's the smoking gun, Cross said, opening a final file. Intercepted communications from last week. Patterson confirmed final payment for what he calls the Chicago package, detailed plans for coordinated attacks on infrastructure throughout the Midwest. I read the translated messages, cross-referenced with metadata that showed they'd been transmitted from Patterson's personal devices. The evidence was overwhelming, but something still felt wrong. Cross, if Patterson is selling secrets to foreign agents, why would he bring me back in? Why risk exposing himself by involving someone who might figure out what he's doing? Because he needs a fall guy, Cross replied. Think about it. When the attacks happened on Friday, who's going to take the blame? The rogue intelligence operative who's been attacking infrastructure for months, or the decorated officer who tried to stop him? The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Patterson hadn't brought me back to stop Cross. He'd brought me back to be the patsy when Cross was framed for the real attacks. Oh my God, I whispered. He's planning to kill both of us.
Now you're getting it. Patterson eliminates the only person who can expose his operation, frames a dead terrorist for the attacks, and walks away with enough money to disappear permanently. Cross closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression I remembered from our time in Afghanistan, the look of a soldier who'd accepted that he might not survive the next mission. So here's the question, Marcus. Are you going to help me stop this, or are you going to walk away and let hundreds of thousands of innocent people die because you're afraid of crossing your handlers? Above us, I could hear the rumble of morning rush hour continuing, commuters heading to jobs, tourists exploring the city, families going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their survival might depend on the decision I made in the next few seconds. I thought about Derek and his smug superiority, Jessica and her designer accessories, Ryan and his expensive cars. Shallow people living shallow lives. But they didn't deserve to die because of government corruption. I thought about my quiet apartment in Logan Square, my boring job analyzing market trends, the simple anonymity I'd worked so hard to build. All of it would disappear the moment I chose a side in this shadow war. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Cross smiled, not the predatory grin from earlier, but something that looked almost like relief. "First, we need to get you some real equipment. That ankle holster is cute, but if we're going up against Patterson's people, you're going to need more firepower." He opened a metal case I hadn't noticed before, revealing an arsenal that would make a SWAT team jealous. "Second, we need to convince someone in authority that Patterson's the real traitor. And third," Cross paused, checking his watch, "we need to do it all before Friday at 3 p.m. when the coordinated attacks are scheduled to begin." I picked up a tactical vest from his equipment cache, feeling the familiar weight of Kevlar and ceramic plates. For 5 years, I'd been Marcus Thompson, boring analyst. But as I strapped on body armor in a forgotten tunnel beneath Chicago, I realized that Marcus Thompson was about to die. In his place stood someone who'd been sleeping for 5 years, someone trained for exactly this kind of impossible mission. The only question now was whether we'd live long enough to complete it. Wednesday afternoon brought rain to Chicago, turning the city gray and making surveillance more difficult, which was exactly what we needed. I'd called in sick to Brennan and Associates, probably for the last time, claiming food poisoning. Derek would have a field day with jokes about me eating cheap takeout if I lived long enough to hear them. Cross had spent the morning teaching me his modified communication protocols and showing me how to access the encrypted networks he'd been using to track Patterson's operation. But our biggest problem wasn't technical. It was convincing someone in authority that a decorated lieutenant colonel was selling American secrets to Chinese intelligence.
We need an ally inside the system, Cross said, adjusting the frequency on a radio scanner. Someone with enough rank to be taken seriously, but clean enough that Patterson hasn't compromised them. I was studying Patterson's financial records on Cross's laptop when something caught my attention. What about General Morrison? Cross looked up sharply. Morrison retired 2 years ago. Officially. But look at these expense reports. I pointed to the screen. Patterson has been reading regularly with someone codenamed Iron Horse. That was Morrison's call sign in Iraq. If Morrison is still active in some capacity, he might be the only person with enough clout to stop this. Morrison was always straight as an arrow, Cross admitted, but he's also Patterson's former commanding officer. Convincing him that his protege is a traitor won't be easy. We don't have a choice. Morrison's our best shot at getting federal resources mobilized before Friday. Cross nodded grimly and started packing equipment into a waterproof bag. Morrison keeps a private office in the Monadnock building downtown. If we're going to approach him, it has to be in person. Too much risk of intercepted communications otherwise. We emerged from the tunnels through a maintenance exit near Millennium Park, looking like two contractors heading home from a job site. The rain provided perfect cover as we made our way through the loop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My instincts proved correct when Cross suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me into the doorway of a closed shop.
2 o'clock, he whispered. Black sedan, government plates. They've been following us for 3 blocks. I glanced casually in the indicated direction. Sure enough, a Crown Victoria with tinted windows was crawling through traffic, keeping pace with pedestrians instead of normal vehicle flow. Classic surveillance vehicle, the kind federal agents used when they wanted to be noticed. Patterson's sending a message, I said. He knows we're together. Which means he's probably already moved to Plan B. Cross checked his watch. We need to reach Morrison fast before Patterson can spin this as 2 rogue operatives working together. We ducked through Millennium Park, using the sculpture installations and tourist crowds for cover. The rain had thinned the usual foot traffic, but there were still enough people around to make tracking difficult for anyone following us. The Monadnock building was a historic high-rise that had been converted into private offices for retired military officers who still needed security clearances for consulting work. Morrison's office was on the 14th floor, behind doors that required both keycard access and biometric verification. How exactly are we supposed to get in? I asked as we studied the building from across the street. Cross smiled and pulled out a maintenance worker's ID badge. Amazing what you can buy on the dark web these days. Plus, I've been planning this approach for weeks. 20 minutes later, we were riding the service elevator to the 14th floor, dressed in coveralls and carrying toolboxes that contained enough weaponry to start a small war. The building's afternoon security was typically light. Most tenants were former military who could handle their own protection. General Morrison's office was at the end of a long hallway lined with similar doors. Cross picked the lock in under 30 seconds while I kept watch for security cameras or unexpected visitors. Inside, Morrison's office looked exactly like what you'd expect from a career military officer. Awards and commendations covered one wall, while another displayed photographs from various combat deployments. Morrison himself sat behind a massive oak desk studying what appeared to be intelligence briefings despite his supposed retirement. He looked up as we entered, his hand moving instinctively toward a desk drawer that probably contained a weapon. General Morrison, I said quickly, removing my maintenance cap. My name is Marcus Thompson, former Staff Sergeant 75th Ranger Regiment. This is Dylan Cross, former Staff Sergeant same unit. We need to talk. Morrison studied us for a long moment, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Thompson and Cross, you're both supposed to be dead. Only one of us is supposed to be dead, sir. The other is supposed to be Patterson's puppet until Friday afternoon. Explain, quickly. I laid out everything we'd discovered. Patterson's financial irregularities, his meetings with Chinese intelligence operatives, the planned infrastructure attacks, and his scheme to frame Cross while using me as a convenient scapegoat. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification on technical details or requesting specific evidence. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for nearly a minute. Patterson was one of my best officers, he said. Brilliant tactician, natural leader, absolute dedication to the mission. What you're describing would require a complete moral collapse.
Or a very large pile of money, Cross said, producing a tablet loaded with Patterson's financial records. Enough money to buy a new identity and disappear permanently after Friday's attacks. Morrison examined the evidence, cross-referencing bank records with known Chinese intelligence front companies. His expression grew darker with each document. This is circumstantial at best. Suspicious patterns, but nothing that would hold up in a military tribunal. You need direct evidence of active collaboration. Which is why we need your help, I said. Patterson's planning to activate his assets tomorrow night. If we can catch him in the act... You'll get yourselves killed, Morrison interrupted. Patterson isn't working alone. If he's been selling secrets for 3 years, he's built an entire network of compromised officials and foreign assets. 2 operatives, no matter how skilled, can't take down that kind of organization. Cross leaned forward. With respect, General, hundreds of thousands of innocent people are going to die if we don't try. Sometimes 2 operatives are all you get. Morrison was quiet again, studying photographs on his wall that showed him with various military units over decades of service. Finally, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a secure satellite phone. He said, I'm going to make some calls. People I trust, people who can mobilize resources without going through Patterson's chain of command. But you need to stay alive long enough for help to arrive.
How long? Cross asked. 36 hours minimum, maybe 48 if we're lucky. I felt my stomach drop. General, the attacks are scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m. That's less than 40 hours from now. Then you better hope we're very, very lucky. Morrison started dialing numbers on the satellite phone. There's a safe house in Evanston, former CIA asset, completely off the books. Address is 2247 Maple Street, basement apartment. Stay there until you hear from me. As we prepared to leave, Morrison called out one more time. Thompson, Cross, what you're attempting is borderline suicidal. Are you absolutely certain Patterson is the source? Cross and I exchanged glances. After everything we'd seen, all the evidence we'd gathered, there was still room for doubt. But doubt was a luxury we couldn't afford. Yes, sir, I said. We're certain. Morrison nodded grimly. Then God help us all. We left the same way we'd entered, through service corridors and maintenance elevators, emerging into the rainy Chicago afternoon as different people than we'd been when we went in. We were no longer just 2 former soldiers trying to expose corruption. We were the last line of defense against a terrorist attack that could reshape American society. The safe house in Evanston was a modest apartment beneath an aging duplex, furnished with military surplus equipment and enough supplies to withstand a siege. But as we settled in to wait for Morrison's response, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. Cross, I said, as he checked weapons and communication equipment. What if we're wrong about Patterson? He looked up from cleaning a rifle. What do you mean? What if someone's been feeding us information, manipulating us into believing Patterson's the traitor? What if this whole thing is an elaborate setup to eliminate people who might discover the real conspiracy? Cross was quiet for a long moment, considering the possibility. Outside, rain continued to fall on a city that had no idea it was about to become a battlefield. Friday morning arrived with crystal clear skies and the kind of bitter cold that makes Chicago winters legendary. I'd barely slept, alternating between monitoring Cross's surveillance equipment and checking my phone for updates for Morrison. The silence was deafening. At 6 a.m., Cross shook me awake from a brief doze. We've got movement. 3 vehicles, federal plates, setting up a perimeter around the block. I peered through the basement window's thick curtains. Black SUVs were positioning themselves at key intersections, their occupants trying to look casual while clearly preparing for some kind of operation. Patterson's making his move, I said. He's going to eliminate us before the afternoon attacks. But Cross was frowning at his laptop screen. Marcus, look at this. I'm intercepting communications from those vehicles. They're not Patterson's people. They're FBI counterterrorism division. My blood went cold.
Morrison sold us out. No, Cross said slowly, reading more of the intercepted messages. Listen to this. Operation Iron Horse is in effect. Primary targets are Patterson and his network. Thompson and Cross are to be protected as key witnesses. Iron Horse, Morrison's old call sign. The general had come through. My phone rang. Morrison's number. Thompson, you and Cross need to get to Union Station immediately. We've identified Patterson's command center, and we have evidence of the afternoon attacks, but we need you there for positive identification and tactical support. Sir, there are federal agents surrounding our location. Those are my people. They'll escort you downtown safely. Patterson's people are mobilizing for their final operation, and we need to stop them before 3 p.m. 20 minutes later, we were riding in an FBI tactical vehicle through downtown Chicago, escorted by enough firepower to stop a small army. The city looked normal. People heading to work, tourists taking photos, street vendors setting up for the lunch rush. None of them knew that in less than 9 hours, everything might change forever. Union Station was bustling with morning commuters when we arrived, but federal agents had quietly taken positions throughout the main concourse. Morrison met us near Track 12, the same platform where this whole nightmare had started.
Patterson's using the old Amtrak maintenance facility as his command center, Morrison explained, handing us tactical vests and communication headsets. We've confirmed at least 8 operatives on site, plus technical support from Chinese intelligence assets. What about the infrastructure targets? Cross asked. 12 cities, simultaneous attacks scheduled for peak rush hour, power grids, water treatment, transportation hubs. We've got teams moving on all locations, but Patterson's the only one who knows the complete operational timeline. I checked my weapon and adjusted the tactical gear. After 5 years of civilian life, it felt strange to be suited up for combat operations, but some skills never fade completely. Sir, what's our objective? Capture Patterson alive, if possible. His computers contain the only complete list of compromised assets and foreign operatives on American soil. If he dies, it could take years to unravel his entire network. We moved through Union Station's service corridors, the same routes Cross and I had used days earlier, but now we were part of a coordinated federal operation involving dozens of agents and enough surveillance equipment to monitor half the city. The maintenance facility was located beneath the main terminal, accessible through tunnels that connected to Chicago's broader underground infrastructure. Patterson had chosen his location well: multiple escape routes, natural sound dampening, and enough electrical systems to power sophisticated communication equipment. Movement inside, the technical team leader reported through our headsets. Thermal imaging shows 9 individuals, heavy electronic equipment, possible weapons cache. Morrison's voice crackled through the comm. Remember, Patterson has detailed knowledge of federal tactical procedures. He'll be expecting a standard raid, which was why we weren't conducting a standard raid. Cross and I entered through a maintenance shaft that opened directly into Patterson's command center, while FBI tactical teams created diversions at the main entrances. The element of surprise would last maybe 30 seconds, but 30 seconds was all we needed. Patterson's operation was more sophisticated than I imagined. Banks of computers lined the walls, displaying real-time feeds from infrastructure facilities across the Midwest. Chinese operatives worked alongside American technical specialists, coordinating the final preparations for attacks that would cripple 12 major cities. And there, in the center of it all, stood Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, wearing civilian clothes, but commanding the room with unmistakable military authority. 15 minutes to final authorization, he was saying into a headset. All teams report ready status. I emerged from the maintenance shaft with my weapon drawn, Cross beside me, federal agents flooding in from multiple entrances simultaneously. Federal agents, everyone on the ground now! The room erupted in chaos. Patterson's people went for weapons while Chinese operatives tried to destroy computer equipment. Cross and I moved with synchronized precision, taking down armed resistors while protecting the technical assets Morrison needed to unravel the entire conspiracy. Patterson himself didn't go for a gun. Instead, he looked directly at me with something that might have been respect. Thompson, he said, calmly, even as federal agents surrounded him. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Why? I asked, keeping my weapon trained on him.
You had everything: career, reputation, respect. Why throw it all away? Patterson smiled grimly. Because I saw what was coming. China's rising, America's declining, and our government is too corrupt and incompetent to adapt. I chose the winning side. You chose money, Cross said flatly. I chose survival. Patterson's hands were cuffed, but his expression remained defiant. In 20 years, when Chinese economic dominance reshapes the global order, you'll understand that I was just ahead of the curve. Federal agents led Patterson away, while technical specialists secured his computer systems. The planned attacks were systematically canceled, with teams across 12 cities reporting successful interdiction of Chinese operatives and compromised infrastructure. It was over. 3 hours later, I found myself back on the Blue Line platform at Union Station, wearing my old civilian clothes and carrying the same briefcase I had used for 2 years. But everything had changed. Derek Hoffman and his crew were there, waiting for their usual train, probably heading back from some overpriced lunch downtown. When Derek spotted me, his face lit up with malicious glee.
Well, well, if it isn't our favorite train rider, Derek announced loudly. Marcus, where have you been? We heard you called in sick yesterday. Food poisoning from eating cheap takeout? Jessica and Ryan laughed on cue, but their amusement faltered when they noticed the man approaching behind me. General Morrison, in full dress uniform, walked directly up to our group, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the vicinity stop and stare. He stopped in front of me and, in a voice that carried across the entire platform, said, "Staff Sergeant Thompson." Then he saluted. A crisp, formal military salute that held for exactly 3 seconds before I returned it with the precision of someone who'd earned the gesture through blood and sacrifice. "Thank you for your service to this country," Morrison said, his voice carrying enough authority to silence the entire platform. "The President himself asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your actions yesterday." The general handed me an envelope, saluted once more, and walked away, leaving Derek, Jessica, and Ryan standing there with their mouths open like fish. I looked at their shocked expressions, then at the envelope in my hand, then back at 3 people who'd spent 2 years making me feel small and worthless. "Well," I said quietly, "I guess I should catch my train." As the Blue Line pulled into the station, I realized that some rides change everything, and sometimes the person everyone thinks they know turns out to be someone completely different. I took my usual seat by the window and opened Morrison's envelope. Inside was a single sentence: "Your country thanks you, and so do I." Behind me, I could hear Derek frantically whispering to Jessica and Ryan, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. But their voices faded as the train pulled away from the station, carrying me back to a life that would never be quite the same. Some secrets are worth keeping. Others are worth everything to protect. And sometimes the quiet guy who takes the train every day is exactly the person you need when the world starts falling apart. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.